with retired Lieutenant Colonel Allen West. The far-reaching impact of the congressional IT breach, the threat of U.S. debt on our national security, the growing China threat, the rise of socialism in America, education or indoctrination, the impact of the energy boom. Now, let's join Kevin Freeman in the Economic War Room.
Economic War Room.
Kevin, it's good to be here with you.
Great having you here.
And congratulations on this show.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Well, we're excited to have you. We've got a lot to talk about. I want to, first off, let you tell your story a little bit, because it ties into one of the things we're talking about, which is how great America is and the land of opportunity. So if you wouldn't mind, just share with us, what's your story?
Look, it's a simple American story of a young kid born and raised in an inner city of Atlanta, Georgia, in the same neighborhood that produced Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. My dad was a corporal in World War II. My mom did 25 years civilian service with the Marine Corps headquarters. My older brother was a Marine infantryman in Vietnam. At the age of 15, my dad challenged me to be the first officer in the family, and so I signed up for high school junior ROTC in Atlanta, graduated high school, went on to ROTC at the University of Tennessee, and earned my commission along with my degree. 22 years in the military. I married an incredible woman who has an MBA and a PhD, whose father was a two-tour combat veteran, infantryman in Vietnam, who's buried at Arlington National Cemetery. We have two great daughters. One is in PA school, doing her clinical rotations. The other is a senior in college, and that's my story. It's a story of that says no matter where you're born, no matter where you come from in America, you can achieve whatever greatness you want.
And you went on and served in Congress?
Yeah, did a little stand-up in Congress as well, and I tell folks that I only served a one term because I did what paratroopers do. We piss off everybody up there, and so Republicans or Democrats didn't want me around, but that's okay. You continue to fight for this great nation.
Yeah, that's great. Well, that opens up so many questions and so many different areas we can talk about. Let's start with that, with Congress, your time in Congress. There's a couple of things that recently we had in the War Room. The gentleman who broke the story on the Awan brothers.
Oh, yeah.
You were in Congress. Tell me, doesn't this strike you as an odd story?
Well, of course it does. I mean, my IT, and people pool IT specialists. And there is no way, when I first read this story, I mean, $100,000 for an IT specialist, or even more than that, your chief of staff on the House side, they don't really make that much more than that. And so that's the first thing that causes you concern. Then the other thing is that when you look and see the folks that these Awan brothers were working with, these were members on the Democrat Party side. They had some committees of assignment: Intelligence Committee, House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, House Armed Services Committee. So these are some interesting individuals that all of a sudden these guys are providing IT support, which meant that they had access to all of their emails and all of their communications. And the fact that this thing has kind of just been brushed to the side, that lets you know that there's a certain cover-up that is going on. When you have a person like Representative Wasserman Schultz, who was complaining and threatening the Capitol Police for the investigation that they were conducting, and then demanding, to have her computer back, which is evidence, that lets you know this goes a lot deeper than what people are reporting and talking about.
Well, it's hard for me to imagine that my personal email, not as a member of Congress, just as an ordinary citizen, my personal password, email, and all of that would be accessible. What could you do with a congressman if you had access to all that information?
Well, you get into whatever they're doing. And like I said, that means any type of classified information that they may be working on because of the certain committees that they're on. And so to have these individuals who, as far as I know, they're not American citizens, to have that level of access, that's very disconcerting. But then again, when you have someone running to be president of the United States of America and has a private email server that's doing classified information, they still running around, scot-free, that just tells you that there's two different levels of justice that is happening in the United States of America. Because as a commissioned officer, in my 22 years, if I had made the mistake, because when I was a battalion commander, I had 2 computer terminals on my desk. One was classified, and that's called NIPRNet. The other was, SIPRNet, and the other was unclassified. That was a NIPRNet. And if I made the mistake of doing classified information on the unclassified computer, hey, look, Kevin, I'm done. I'm gone. I'm going to lose my security clearance, and that's the end of my career. What Hillary Clinton did, what you see happening with this A1 case, this is espionage. This is, a gross negligence when it comes to classified information. This is the type of thing that people end up at Fort Leavenworth about, and nothing is happening with this.
So you find out, you're in Congress, you're a congressman, and you find out that someone has accessed your information. You hired someone on an IT basis. For whatever reason, you picked these people, and you found out they were actually abusing their privileges and possibly working for Pakistani intelligence or selling secrets or what. What would you do? How would you respond to that?
First thing I do is I report them to the Capitol Hill Police. And I am the one that initiates an investigation, because if you're not doing that, then you're complicit. And that's the other question. How much did these members of Congress know that they're not divulging on this situation, this real violation of our classification of information and the means by which we're supposed to be caring for that classified information?
Yeah. This sounds more like collusion than anything else that we
without a doubt. And if you go and you read some intelligence reports, this is something that the Pakistani ISI has kind of a penchant for doing. Trying to get in there and have plans to have access to information in the political arena and then getting that information out. And again, like I said, when you look at these members that the A1 brothers were working for and providing their IT services, these folks were on the Armed Services Committee and the Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence.
So here's a question that's the obvious answer, but who was the head of the Democrat National Committee when they were hacked?
Well, it was the same person, Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman-Schultz. And so it really is unnerving to me that this is not a top-level story. If you want to talk about a special counsel or any of this type of stuff, this is what they should be looking at.
Well, especially when we know that the DNC was somehow IT compromised.
Yes.
One way or another. And the head of the DNC...
And they didn't want it to be reported.
...has extraordinarily lax standards for IT security.
I believe that to be true.
Yeah. So let's talk about some other things in Congress.
Sure.
$21 trillion debt.
Mm-hmm.
Approaching $1 trillion annually in deficits.
Mm-hmm.
What do we do about that?
Well, it's unsustainable. And really, when you think about it, if you look at the unfunded liabilities also of the Medicare to Medicaid Social Security, now you're talking about 80-some-odd trillion, maybe close to 100 trillion, some people have estimated. And when you look at this show that you have, the Economic War Room, remember it was the former Chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff, Admiral Mike Mullen, who when asked what's the greatest national security threat to the United States of America, he said it is our debt. Because if we get to the point where we're not even able to service the things that are most important, the priorities of our federal government, which is to provide for the common defense, then you're going to be in perpetual deficit spending. You're going to be in perpetual debt because you're going to be borrowing money to take care of all these unfunded liabilities and mandates that you have on the mandatory spending side. And we need to have courageous representatives and senators that are up there saying that something has to be done to reform these programs. Why? Because 64% of the federal government's budget is on the mandatory spending side. When you talk about our defense spending, that's only about 17, maybe 18% of the overall budget of the United States of America, only about 3.1, 3.2% of our GDP. Now, where should the priorities be up there in Washington, D.C.? It should not be getting more people wedded on, federal government subsistence programs.
What are the constitutional priorities? What is the government specifically authorized to do by the Constitution?
Well, if you look, and this is what they do up in Washington, D.C., and I'm just a simple guy. I understand provide for the common defense. Provide is an active verb. Promote the general welfare. Promote is a passive verb. but yet they have somehow juxtaposed these things, and they believe that they're supposed to be providing for welfare. And so when you look at those major duties and responsibilities under Article 1 of our Constitution, which is, for the legislative branch, a lot of those things have to deal with our national security. But yet they are not owning up to that. What do they find themselves doing? More food stamps programs. More, this craziness now about a universal basic income, where we're basically just going to give people money for no other reason. Well, who decides who gets the $500 a month, which is something that they're looking at in California and also in Chicago? That's not the role of the federal government. The role of the federal government is to protect us, and in protecting us, you have to provide for that common defense. And when I hear people talk about abolishing ICE, what do they want? You don't want to have our borders secured. You want criminal and illegal immigrants, gangs like MS-13 roaming our streets. No, that's a complete violation of your responsibilities there at the federal government.
Yeah, the border security is one that's specific to the Constitution, to the federal government.
Of course.
But if the federal government fails in it, the Constitution even allows a provision for a state to protect the border.
Absolutely, and that's one of the key things that you see there. And again, that comes back to the 9th and 10th Amendments. All those things, those powers not enumerated to the federal government, it falls back to the states and to the individual citizens. So I find it very strange that at a time when you have people that are advocating for us to have clear and open borders, they're also advocating for the individual American not to be able to protect and defend themselves. So this is an incredible abdication of the federal government saying, we don't believe in national sovereignty. Well, the Democrat Party. We don't believe in, securing our streets and whatever. Let's have sanctuary cities and states. But on the other side, Kevin, you're not able to protect yourself and defend yourself. Well, you can't abdicate your most important priorities and responsibilities and then tell me that, I'm screwed too. I can't even protect myself, because the number one inalienable right that you have, as the stated in the Declaration of Independence, is life.
Life. It's funny. Let's go around the world. Let's talk about China for a second, because you've got a lot of billionaires that have been created in China because they have a Marxist control philosophy, but they've adopted some capitalist principles, aided with a lot of intellectual property theft and a lot of mandated technology transfer and so forth. But their market, the billionaires, they're trying to get their money out,
too.
Well,
absolutely. And the thing that we should have understood is that when China saw the collapse of the Soviet Union, they knew there was an economic collapse. It was not a military collapse. So they figured out, how do we adopt this free market capitalism thing, but we can still stay communist? And two important things. When they got control of Hong Kong, the British, turned it back over. And then when they got the most favored nation status for trade, they understood that now is our opportunity. Now is our opportunity to get the West and all these other democratic governments, sucked into us and these cheap goods that we can sell to them. That's part of the free market economic system. And now we're starting to see the downfall and the pitfall of that. I mean, they have become elevated as an economic power, but what are they doing with that economic power? They're using it for military advancement. And so that is how, what you have here, the economic war room, is so important, because the military teaches you there are four elements to national power. The dime theory: diplomatic, informational, military, and economic. And so often we fail to understand that interrelationship. But finally, we have a president that I think gets it. And that's why you see this going after China. It's not just the trade deficit thing, but it's getting them to understand this is not happening anymore. You want to play this game of stealing our intellectual property. You want to play this game of forcing our businesses into these technology transfers. We're going to hit you back. We're going to hit you back harder. We're going to start playing chess and not checkers. Yeah. And we're going to start having a long-term strategy, because China does have that long-term strategy. And when you think about, down here in the South China Sea, 40 to 45% of the sea lane of commerce operates through there. And this is where you see them making those man-made islands. This is where you see them intruding on the Senkaku Islands or the Scarborough Shoals here with the Philippines, because they understand that the means by which a nation really does project and extend its power, it's not through a big army. It's through a navy. It's through a navy. That history has always taught us that.
Well, and they're also taking with the Belt and Road Initiative.
Absolutely.
They're creating debt traps of nations that do business with them, which I find interesting. I mean, Australia started to complain about this. All the allies of Australia are now espousing Chinese policies. Why? Because they're indebted to the Chinese.
Absolutely.
Because they accepted infrastructure.
Well, I mean, you think about it. When you talk about the One Belt, One Road strategy, you know, look at what they're doing in East Africa, all across here, and look at what they're doing with the Chinese-Pakistan Economic Corridor. You know, do you want to know who's causing a lot of consternation for us in Afghanistan? Chinese. But the Chinese are even looking at, if I can find it, over here, right there, building a port in Karachi. Now, where else do you see the Chinese in our own hemisphere? They're running the Panama Canal. Isn't that incredible? Chinese contractors running this incredible thing that we built. They're building port facilities in the Bahamas. They're building port facilities in Jamaica. They understand this.
And if they have you indebted to them, the Bible says the borrower is slave to the lender.
Absolutely.
But aren't we indebted to China too?
And that's the sad thing. That comes back to the debt problem and what we said originally, that our greatest national security threat is our debt.
The largest asset, or one of the largest assets, financial asset on the foreign books right now is student loans, monies we've loaned out. I don't see in the Constitution where it says the federal government should be guaranteeing that everybody can borrow money to go to college.
No, there's so many other things. I mean, the Export-Import Bank and things of this nature. But again, it comes back to not seeing the ability to have policies that set the conditions for Americans to pursue their happiness. Now we're listening to people, they want to create policies to try to guarantee happiness. And so when you hear folks like Bernie Sanders or this young Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, you know, we just want to have free college. Well, that's not my job to pay for someone else to go to college. I have two daughters, and my responsibility is to take care of them. But, you know, have the policies that enable people to go out. I think it's the College 529 plan. You know, that's what you need to have. More opportunities for Americans to be able to invest money, non-taxable, to pay for later, you know, future education opportunities. But you just continue to see a federal government that is expanding their relationship with the individual. And in expanding their relationship with the individual, they're making the individual more subservient, more subjugated to the institution of government, because let's realize it, it's about power. It's about control. And if you have more people wedded to the government, then the government has an electoral base. And that's what this comes back to.
I see two problems with the college. One is, if you take the federal loans, well, actually, that creates two problems of its own. One is that you're indebted to the government for, you know, as long as it takes, and probably you owe so much money that no matter how much you earn, you'll never get out from under it. And the second one is that if you're under that level of debt, you're going to start demanding that there be this free college.
Of course, because you want the debt to be relieved. And remember that one of the little tidbits of the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act was that the federal government nationalized college student loans.
Yeah.
You don't have that, you know, being able to go to banks. And what did the federal government also do as part of Obamacare? They raised the interest rates. Because why? They just looked at it as a means to generate more revenues for this, you know, free health care thing. And that's where we need people to get back to understanding the blocking and tackling of how our government is supposed to operate, and understand civics and understand that relationship between the individual and the government. And articulate that in a manner much the same as you're doing here, where the everyday American citizen, I call them Joe and Jane Six-Pack, that they can understand it.
Yeah. Yeah. The second problem is with college when it's free is that you drive the demand up.
Oh, sure.
Which means that the cost is going to go up.
Oh, yeah.
And so we see college tuition just continually ratcheting higher.
And look at some of the salaries for these tenured professors. Look, Kevin, you know, I love my university, University of Tennessee, but I will tell you that you go on the campus of a lot of these colleges and universities now, they're like 5-star resorts. I mean, the Student Athletic Center, you know, it was decent, it was okay, but now it looks like, you know, a Gold's Gym or, you know, 24, you know, fitness and everything like that. The whole purpose is to give kids a quality education so that they can go out and be productive members. And so now, all of a sudden, we don't have a system of education, we have a system of indoctrination. Look at all these wacky, you know, degrees or you know, gender studies and all of these things that are there. Their kids are sitting around and, you know, 5, 6, 7 years. You know, you should not be going and just sit around for free for that.
How do you make money with wacky degrees?
You don't.
How do you? So in other words, you're taking a 4 or 5, 6 year vacation at a 5-star resort, and the bills pile up, and you just have to pay out for the rest of your life.
Absolutely, and there is no return on that investment. You know, to include, the young lady that has an economics degree from Boston University who just won that election there in the Bronx and Brooklyn, who is espousing economic principles that make no sense. So what did she do for 4 years at Boston University? Oh, by the way, she's going to be a congressman. And so when you talk about debt and deficits, if those are the type of people that are winning and getting elected.
Well, let's talk about that for a second, because her example is perfect. She's a socialist.
Yeah. And who would have ever thought, and who would have ever thought that we would be openly discussing representatives in our government that are avowed socialists? Because to me, what you believe in is everything that is antithetical to who we are as a constitutional republic. I don't have any problem with you believing or pursuing that, but what you believe in is not consistent with our Constitution. Wealth redistribution is not consistent with our Constitution. Nationalizing economic production is not consistent with our Constitution. Creating and expanding a welfare state is not consistent with our Constitution. Social egalitarianism is not consistent with our Constitution.
And it's not consistent with success.
It's definitely not.
Where in the world has socialism worked?
Nowhere. But this is the interesting argument whenever you talk to them. Well, they didn't understand pure socialism. Well, I mean, help me out here. All of you guys were running down there to Venezuela, and you were, slapping high fives with Hugo Chavez, talking about how great he is. Funny you don't see him going down to Venezuela now, that they're eating out of garbage cans. And why Venezuela is so important to me, there you got Caracas right there, beautiful city. Now, when I was a young lieutenant at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, my artillery tactics instructor when I was there was from Venezuela, Captain Gonzalez, and he showed us pictures of Venezuela. I mean,
so where has it worked? Okay, so what about Europe?
No, well, you know what? It's interesting that you're starting to see many of these countries in Europe moving away from it. Look at the new, I guess, president, prime minister of Italy. They're moving away from this. And I always like it how, the progressive socialist left here in the United States of America says that we need to be more like some of the Scandinavian countries. Well, those Scandinavian countries are moving away from it too. But how can you compare the United States of America, 350 million people, to a country of 3.5 million people? I mean, some of these countries that they think we should emulate, they're not even the size of Dallas-Fort Worth. And so, no, this is not a successful platform.
And as countries, what's their defense budget like? What do they spend for the common defense, which is a legitimate role of government?
It is the legitimate role of government. And if you read Frederick Bastiat's The Law, I mean, that's what the government is supposed to do, protect its citizens and not come up with this misconceived philanthropy and this naked greed, which is what you have. I was stationed over in Europe. That was my first duty assignment. The United States of America provided the security blanket for those European countries. And so those European countries were able to go off on all these social welfare junkets. And I think that's to the credit of President Trump now to come up and say, hey, McFly, time to pay up. Okay, we're not sacrificing. We're not doing this anymore. And when he brought up the fact that, Angela Merkel in Germany is sitting down and they're making a deal with Russia to have an oil and gas pipeline, well, how is it that you are telling us, and the United States is really NATO, how is it that you're telling us to be over here to protect you from this bad guy, but you're doing business with this bad guy? Why aren't you buying the oil and gas from us? Oh, by the way, when are you going to pay up that 2% of your GDP for NATO defense? But the people that are getting it are the folks in Eastern Europe. Poland gets it. The Baltic states.
Because they came out of the
They came out of it, absolutely. And so I think when you talk about where we're looking at economically in Europe, I think that you may be seeing a shift from the old Europe, Western Europe, over to Eastern Europe. Better security arrangements, better national security deals and military exercises, and better economic trade arrangements as well.
Well, when we talk about democratic socialism, which is mostly in the old of Europe, and whether it is we're democratic socialist or whether it is just corruption, like we saw in Greece and almost took Greece down. I have a theory, and my theory is that because there's competition, that democratic socialism sort of kind of works, at least for a little while. It sort of kind of works. It doesn't work efficiently. It doesn't work effectively. We have to cover their defense budget and all of those things. But it's something you can point to and say, well, look at this quality of life item that they have, whether it's extended paternity leave and maternity leave and all these different things. But it doesn't work where there's no competition.
No.
And I think Chavez and Venezuela, when he cut out free and fair elections,
yes,
and he eliminated the Congress and all those things happened, at that point it just seems to spiral into Animal Farm.
Well, it does, and that's what the left has to have. They have to have ideological domination, and they have to completely eliminate all political opposition. And that's what you see here in the United States of America that has the left so upset. They figured, okay, we got the 8 years of Obama, then we'll get the 8 years of Hillary Clinton, then we'll get another 8 years of somebody else, all based upon identity politics. First black president, first female president, first Hispanic president, first gay president, first whatever type of president. Because no one's going to pay attention to who we are. They're just going to pay attention to this great sugar fix event that we're going to give you. And that's really what socialism is all about. It's a quick sugar fix. It has no ability to sustain itself. So when a Bernie Sanders stands up and says, we're going to provide Medicaid, that's what we were saying, Medicaid for everybody. Don't worry about that poverty line. We're just going to get rid of that. And everyone's going to be on Medicaid. That's $32.3 trillion. Now, we were just talking about the fact that we're $21 trillion in debt.
Right.
Now, how are we going to, fund and sustain this thing, this $32.3 trillion? It's not going to happen. And so we need to better educate the American people.
Well, the rich will pay for it, right?
Yeah, but who defines what's rich?
Yeah, that's the problem.
See, I mean, that's like Lucy with Charlie Brown. The football continues to move.
Yeah.
I mean, rich is not the person with the $1 million. I mean, Barack Obama came down and during his administration, $250,000.
Right.
Well, that ain't rich.
And the taxes would go through the roof.
Well, of course.
To pay.
And then what happens with economic production?
It doesn't matter because we're all socialists. It all works. The government will pay for it.
We're all a collective.
That's the answer.
Yeah, we're all a collective. And I think that, again, that is the antithesis of where America is about individual sovereignty. But what we are seeing happen are some people that believe that it's about government sovereignty. Remember when Barack Obama said in 2012 in Roanoke, Virginia, if you own a business, you didn't build that.
Yeah.
So basically what he said to you, Kevin, is that this show that you have created with your own innovation, ingenuity, and went out and sought investment, you didn't build that. We'll come in and we'll take over this show, and we'll give you your talking points. That's not freedom.
No.
It's not liberty.
No. What about in your personal life? You told us your story, which is an amazing story. What if your dad came to you and said, instead of, I want you to be an officer, you'd be the first officer in the family, he said to you, I want you to go get as much as you can given to you from the system?
Well, my dad would have never said that. My mom would have never said that. They were registered Democrats. John Lewis was my congressional representative there. But my parents were conservative in nature. My parents believed in faith. They believed in family. They believed in individual responsibility. They believed in education. They believed in service to this country. And so my folks, I can tell you, I never saw my parents go down and take out a car loan. If you didn't have the cash to do it, then you don't get it. And if you want it, you can put it. Remember the old days of layaway?
Yeah.
When you got the money, then you can get it. But you don't go out and find yourself owing someone. For their generation, that was detestable. To believe that I have to owe someone, no. If you live within your means, you balance your budget, you set the priorities. And that's what we need to get back to. And really, that's what people are doing every single day in their lives. But our federal government is not doing it.
Yeah. Well, and part of the problem we have, I think, is the education system. The education system.
We don't have an education system.
Okay, it is a system of indoctrination. Yeah. And what is being indoctrinated?
It's the leftist policies. When you look now, it's getting down into middle schools. Or in some cases, it's getting down into the elementary schools. When people are going out there and saying, hey, Kevin, you don't really have to be a boy. You can be whatever you want. That's something you can decide. Or, I just recently read in Europe, they're allowing, sick children to decide that they want to be euthanized. This is nuts. That should not be the type of thing that we're...
It's everything upside down.
It's totally.
And so Ben Shapiro says, if people say socialism, I like socialism because it's more fair. It's more fair. And Ben Shapiro will say socialism is economic slavery.
It is economic enslavement instead of economic empowerment. And again, I remember, I was talking to some high school kids, and it was high school football season back down in South Florida, and they asked me to kind of, explain socialism. I said, okay, this is what socialism is. I said, who's your biggest rival in high school football? They said, North Briar Prep. I said, okay, you guys are playing North Briar Prep. First half, you're up 28-7. You go into the locker room during halftime, but then when you come back out, you look up at the scoreboard and it says 21-14. And you ask yourselves, what the heck happened? I mean, did the scoreboard break? Well, then the coach gets you over on the sideline, and then he explains it to all your parents and your fans. That someone up in the press box decided the game was a little bit too lopsided. It wasn't fair. So they took a touchdown away from you guys, and they gave it over to North Briar Prep. So now the game is a little bit closer. It's 21-14. And you'll start out the next half. And because people want to have a little bit more fairness. And those young people said, oh, we don't like that. They said, that's not right. And I said, why is it not right? They said, because we earned those 4 touchdowns.
Immoral.
Yeah, we earned those 4 touchdowns. But you know what was interesting, Kevin? I asked them, so what happens in the second half? And you know what they said? We don't know if we should score, because someone may decide to take it away from us.
Wow.
And that's what happens in a society where you punish the producers. Why should I go out and work hard and produce when I know that someone in the press box is going to take it away from me?
Yeah. Yeah. And that's why it's economic enslavement.
It is.
And because when an individual says, my labor, the produce of my labor, doesn't belong to me, it belongs to all of society.
Yes.
What do you want to do with that?
Well, that's the thing that Karl Marx talked about. When you have John Locke, who sat down in the Second Treatise of Government and talked about natural rights theory, life, liberty, and property, but then you have Marx that talks about the abolition of individual property. And so this is very simple. This is a simple ideological choice that we have. Either you believe in this individual ability to go out and have life, liberty, and property, which Thomas Jefferson changed to pursuit of happiness, or you believe that the government is supreme. The government controls the schools. The government controls your life. The government controls your attainment of property. Everything. The government, completely, takes all of the means of economic production. So who are you really working for? What is your whole raison d'etre? What is your whole purpose in life? You don't have a purpose in life other than what someone says this is what you're allowed to have, which comes back to what Obama said in 2012. That if you own a business, you didn't build it. That was the most disrespectful thing that any president of the United States of America, any person, could say to the American people.
And if you didn't build it, you don't have a right to use it.
Of course not.
Or own it, or control it.
I mean, think of the insanity for him to say that the only reason you have a business is because the government put the road there, or the government had the school. Well, who the heck pays for the roads to be built?
Right. And who is the government?
Yeah.
Who is the government? Is it the people, which is what the Constitution says? Who is the government?
It does not become the people. It becomes much like the Soviet Union used to have, the old Politburo. And you have a bunch of folks that are making up the political, media, the academic, the entertainment elites, the cultural elites, that they're making all the decisions. I was recently on Mark Levin's show, and I said, you got this cut line. You got all these people up there, then the rest down here, you used to call them Joe Schmuckatelli. That's what we call it in the Army. So I don't want to be a Joe Schmuckatelli. I am just as important as any of these people that call themselves the elites that believe that they know what's best for my life.
No, absolutely. But you have this government that exists, their bureaucracy, their media, their education, and they're in power. And they'll do everything they can to retain their power.
And that is why the left is so upset with the election victory of Donald Trump. And really, it's the establishment, the political establishment, is upset because he has turned things upside down. And the fact that you see our economic growth, the fact that you see wages on the uptick, the fact that you see more Americans getting back to work, the fact that you see someone that's talking about how his country and our citizens are important and everyone has a voice, the forgotten man and woman, that is something that has really steamed the other side. So what do they come out with? hashtag resistance or what have you. And I find it so interesting, Kevin, when you have a group called Antifa that says they're anti-fascist, but yet their whole reason for existence and what they do is to keep you from being able to have your freedom of speech.
Yeah, we talked about the term Nazi is National Socialist.
That's right.
I think these are Glazis. They're global socialists.
Yeah.
And so it's the same as Hitler, only just with a global view.
But the thing is, if you don't have an education system, if you have a system of indoctrination, they're not learning that, and they're not getting that. And so I think one of the critical places where constitutional conservatism has to see a resurgence is on our college and university campuses, in our high schools. And that means we've got to break the control of the teachers' unions and what have you.
Yeah, but the opposite is being pushed, and it's being pushed hard. From the education standpoint, we're going to indoctrinate you, and then when you graduate, we're going to give you money. Not any reasonable amount of money. It's just a tiny bit of money, but you'll be...
Oh, you mean crumbs?
Yes, crumbs. and then but if you want, you can smoke as much pot as you want, and you can go into any deviancy that you want, and those are the only freedoms that are allowed. You know, we won't allow the entrepreneur as a young man or woman, boys or girls, to set up a lemonade stand.
No.
God forbid that they would do that.
That's economic independence, and you cannot have economic independence.
Well, here's the problem for the left. Economic independence. We're in Texas. You're living in Texas. We're seeing an energy boom that is changing the world. Can you talk about that?
Well, without a doubt, and that comes back to the relief of the regulations. I mean, when you have a president that says he wants to destroy, industries so that he can elevate a certain type of agenda, the renewables, the wind and the solar. We're getting back to understanding that we have these resources here, and let's use that incredible innovation. Let's look at the fracking miracle that we have, and let's make ourselves energy independent. Let's make ourselves a net exporter of these resources. So you can undermine the power of OPEC. You can undermine the influence of Russia. And isn't it great that it is right here in Texas where you have those policies that are saying we're open for business. I mean, look at how many corporations are departing some of these other states, like California, and they're coming here to Texas because you do have those economic growth policies, the policies of economic empowerment. However, the real danger is that you are having people come into this state that are still holding on to, kind of like Lot's wife.
Yeah.
You turn around and look and turn into a pillar of salt. And they're still looking back at California. They're still looking back at Illinois, New York, and New Jersey. You should come here and understand one simple thing. And I think one of the critical things we need to ask people when they're coming to Texas from these other states, why are you here? Because if you don't understand why you are here, then maybe you need to go back and you need to figure it out. But you can't come here and move, Toyota, State Farm, or whoever, some of these other great corporations, but then the employees say, I still want to be like how I was in California. That's the locust effect.
Yeah.
When you move from one area that was once fertile, I mean, California was once, a very different state, and you destroy it, and then you go to Colorado, which was once a very successful state, and then you destroy it, and then you go to Arizona. And now you go to New Mexico, and now you come here to Texas. And that's the long-term strategy of the progressive left, is that they are going into successful red states, but they're going into these urban centers. They're going to the major population areas, and they're taking them over. And you see that, Kevin, here in Texas. You see it in Dallas. You see it down the 35 corridor to Austin, to San Antonio, to Houston, to El Paso, to Corpus Christi. All of these major urban centers are being run by people that have a belief system, a principle of governance that is the opposite of what has made Texas great. And so what we have to do is make sure that we go back in, and we got to fight for these city councils. We got to fight for these school boards. We got to fight in these these urban centers, which is where you see the greatest amount of failure of their policies. So it is great that we have, the oil and gas industry coming back. But what happens when all of a sudden the people that are running the city of Austin become the people that are running the state of Texas?
Right. They won't let Austin keep the name.
I'm so crazy about. Yeah, I talked about that. Yeah.
Yeah, so, and if we go into the inner cities and we educate in the inner cities, the problem is when you move from the rural environment, where you're responsible for your water, you're responsible, and you move under government services, you get used to it. And so the rural parts of California are actually still very conservative.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
The rural parts of Illinois, the rural,
yes.
it is the city and the inner city government. You may have seen this. In fact, I may have read this in one of your blogs. The comparison between Detroit and Nagasaki. 1945, we drop a bomb. It's arguably the worst city in the world because it's just been irradiated, versus Detroit, which was the most prosperous, best city in the world. And you take different policies. You take the MacArthur policies in Japan, and you follow freedom, and you take the left-leaning progressive policies in Detroit. Now we've got the complete opposite.
Yeah. Detroit now looks like a war zone, although it's trying to come back. But it's all about the right type of leadership. And so I always tell people, when you look at my ideological hero is Booker T. Washington. Here's a guy that was born into slavery. But when he became free, he had a quest for one thing, and that was a quality education. And what he did in getting that quality education, then he was tasked to replicate that down south. Now, someone would have thought, how does a person that was born in slavery, create an education institution down south? Look at what he did with Tuskegee Institute. He made it a relevant education. He enabled people to be able to go out and be productive members of society. And that institution still stays. Here's a man that was born in slavery. He hosted a president at his university. Here's a man born into slavery. He visited the White House. We're talking turn of the century, 1900s. We're not talking about a couple of years ago. So I don't buy into these excuses that you can't. And I always tell folks, when Barack Obama came out with that saying, yes, we can, he did not mean the individual America. He meant government. Yes, we can. We can dominate. We can rule your life. We can, all of these things. He had no concern about the incredible, indomitable entrepreneurial spirit that has made this nation, it's the model of the world in 42 years? That's a miracle what has happened here in the United States of America. But it's a miracle because, as Alexis de Tocqueville wrote about in Democracy in America, because it's about the liberties that we enjoy. It's about the respect and regard of the individual. And it's not about the institution of government. So again, what we keep coming back to is, how do we fix this relationship between the institution of government and the individual? That is what we have to do.
Well, I think one of the differences, and de Tocqueville saw it, is the worship of God versus the worship of the state.
Absolutely.
If you believe in a higher power that's not the government, and you believe that there's a creator and so forth, it changes your attitude on what you do. And part of our education system has been tearing down any potential for someone to believe in higher power.
And that's the importance of what John Locke did. Because John Locke moved away from divine rights theory that said the king and the queen and all these, duke and duchess, they were the ones in control of your life, to natural rights theory. Every single person gets their rights from a creator. And that is why one of the preeminent things about progressive socialism, Marxism, communism, whatever you want to call it, is secular humanism. And so when you see people that are saying, God couldn't get, this gender thing right, there's not just male and female. There's 61 others. There's 63 genders. God couldn't get the weather right. It's man-made climate change. I remember when people asked me about climate change. I said, yeah, winter, spring, summer, and fall. They said, no, man-made climate. I said, no. So, there's a creator, this got this under control. But what they're doing is they're delegitimizing, they're undermining the sovereignty of the creator. So that all of a sudden, if the creator can't get gender right, if the creator can't get the weather right, then how can he get this thing about inalienable rights, this life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness stuff? He couldn't get that right. We can get it right. We're the one that says you have a right to own a home. You have a right to free health care. You have a right to free college education. We're the grantors of your rights, not this creator guy, because he couldn't get this stuff right.
And when we give you the free college education, it really is indoctrination. It really is to get you, because it keeps the animal farm people at the top. There's some are more, everybody's equal, but some are more equal than others. If you could wave a magic wand, what would you do to make America the best it could be?
I will tell you that, number one, the most important economics and tactics in the military it's pretty much so black and white. If you do these things with your economy, these principles, you have success. I mean, it goes back to Sun Tzu, which I see you have sitting over there, The Art of War. If you don't do these things, you're going to have failure. And when I look at what is happening in the United States of America, it is a very simple discussion between the policies, the principles, the fundamentals that lead to success, or the policies, principles, and fundamentals that lead to failure. You know, I'm a college football nut, and I'm just so excited that we're about to get back into college football season. Anyone will tell you that college football or football period is based upon two things: blocking and tackling. It's not about, you know, the fumble-rooskies or whatever kind of, you know, plays you come up with. It's about those two fundamentals. If you don't block, you don't tackle, you don't win football games. If we don't get back to economic restoration, economic growth, economic independence for our citizens, economic empowerment, the opposite is failure.
And we want to take individuals. All these things are happening complex around the world, and the average person doesn't have a chance to really understand them. Mm-hmm. The media doesn't give them the opportunity. Their education system doesn't give them the opportunity. But all of these have direct personal impacts. It impacts your stock market investments, or your pension plan, or your bank account. And, you know, times have been pretty good, so people don't think, you know, the bank is fine. But it wasn't that long ago, in fact, about 10 years ago, in which you'd go to bed on a Friday and you'd wake up Saturday morning and you see in the paper that the name of the bank that you have all your money in has changed.
Yeah. Well, think about this. The 2008 meltdown, that financial crisis, Jimmy Carter, Community Reinvestment Act, everyone has a right to own a home. See, it sounds real good when people say we're going to give you something, we're going to provide you a right outside of your life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness that you have, and it always lends to some type of demise.
That's socialism in action.
Yes, it is.
It always ends in failure. Well, I appreciate it. Colonel West, thank you so much for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
A great blessing.
Got it.